After weeks of waiting, the stage is finally set for the Senate impeachment trial to begin next week. The House voted earlier today to send along 2 articles of impeachment against Donald Trump, and they approved 7 so-called impeachment managers, choosing Intel Chair Adam Schiff, Judiciary Chair Jerry Nadler, and 5 others to act as, prosecutors during the trial, which will ultimately determine whether Trump is removed from office. The move came after the House Intelligence Committee released a trove of new evidence they say further proves Trump abused his office. The documents come courtesy of a former associate of Rudy Giuliani, Lev Parnas, who's been indicted on campaign finance charges, include notes like this one scribbled on hotel stationery, quote, "Get President Zelensky to announce that the Biden case will be investigated." Seems like a pretty clear enough objective. Then in a newly released letter, Giuliani tells Ukraine's president he's working, quote, in his capacity as personal counsel to President Trump and with his knowledge and consent. Then there was the series of WhatsApp texts between Parnas and a current Republican congressional candidate about Marie Yovanovitch, who was then ambassador to Ukraine. Several contained expletives about her, including one message which read, "Wow, can't believe Trump hasn't fired this bitch. I'll get right on that." Other exchanges also indicated they were part of some sort of surveillance of Yovanovitch. And while the White House is predicting the trial won't last more than 2 weeks, others estimate it could extend to 3 or possibly even longer, effectively pausing the presidential campaigns of all the Democratic senators who are running. But a little break may not be the worst thing for Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, whose he said, she said dispute about a private conversation they had in 2018 was not resolved last night. Warren even refused to shake Sanders' hand at the end after he again denied, saying that a woman could not win the presidency in 2020. And as for other issues the candidates sparred on, health care was a big divider.
The problem is that plans like the mayor's and like the vice president's is that they are an improvement. They are an improvement over where we are right now, but they're a small improvement.
It's just not true that the plan I'm proposing is small. We got to move past a Washington mentality that suggests that the bigness of plans only consists of how many trillions of dollars they put through the Treasury, that the boldness of a plan only consists of how many Americans it can alienate.
I don't buy that it's not enough. It is a big, big step to say to people making $100,000 a year that your premiums will be cut in half, which is what the nonprofit public option will do.
On political experience and past voting records, we saw some daylight as well.
Joe and I listened to what Dick Cheney and George Bush and Rumsfeld had to say. I thought they were lying. I did everything I could to prevent that war. Joe saw it differently.
It was a mistaken vote, but I think my record overall on everything we've done has been, I'm prepared to compare it to anybody's on this stage.
Whoever is going to beat Mr. Trump is going to have to beat him on the economy, and I have the experience and the expertise to show that he's a fake there and a fraud.
Now, if he can only learn not to stare into the camera. Joining me to discuss all this and more, former Republican Governor Jane Swift. She is now the president of the education nonprofit LearnLaunch. Governor Swift, it's good to see you. Michael Curry is former president of the Boston NAACP, now chair of the National NAACP Advocacy and Policy Committee. Michael, it's good to see you, too.
Good to be here.
I don't want to dwell on this a lot, but this really got to me. What does it say that private individuals target our ambassador to Ukraine, threaten her, surveil her, and the response of her boss, the Secretary of State, is silence? It's unimaginable to me, Governor.
Have you no shame? You know, there was a time when people brought their values with them into the public arena, and I hope at some point we'll return to that.
You know, is it as simple as the fact Giuliani, personal lawyer for Secretary of State Pompeo's boss, and you don't offend the boss, so you don't defend your own ambassador, even when she's threatened?
Yeah, I mean, we saw this DOJ, this administration, there's a lot of sacrificing of values going on right now. And I think people were recruited and are retained within this administration for ignoring things just like this. It's not new. It's not a surprise. And quite frankly, there's a history of this, even prior to President Trump taking the presidency.
I wish I had said, have you no shame, because that's exactly what it is. So Democratic voters say the most important thing to them, they have their principles and policy priorities. Number one is, can you beat Donald Trump? Anybody demonstrate last night or in the recent days that they rise to the top of the list on that count?
Well, you know, it's funny. I don't tend to subscribe to the polls when they say, okay, who can beat Donald Trump? I think it's still early in the process. I think there is
voting in 18 or 19 days.
There's conventional wisdom that I think folks believe, and I had this conversation with many, including a candidate for president, that people believe Joe Biden is the presumptive nominee because he's the best qualified or the most favorable to win against Donald Trump. I don't subscribe to that. I think part of that is race, too, that they believe a white man takes a white man to beat Donald Trump.
That includes black voters.
That includes some black voters. That includes some black voters. That's disturbing to me. I think Senator Warren distinguished herself. I think Buttigieg is an interesting character that people are taking an interest in, even people of color.
You want to mention the other three also? Or no?
And of course, Biden and Bernie as well.
Kidding.
I will get a call if I don't mention Bernie.
Okay, fine. So is there somebody, you're a Republican, I know you're not a huge Trump fan. Is there anybody amongst the Democrats who you say that man or woman is the best to stand toe-to-toe with Donald Trump?
So I wake up a lot of days and say, why am I Republican? And then I watch the Democratic debate and I say, oh, okay, I know I'm not a Democrat because, I mean, Amy Klobuchar to me represents the kind of experience, credibility, stability that I think appeals to the kind of middle-of-the-road values that are going to decide this election.
Why is she not winning, you mean?
Why is she at least not in the top tier? And I will say, I actually do believe that Pete Buttigieg also is a much stronger candidate than the other three in the top tier because, you know, when you are mentioning the lessons you learned in Vietnam, I think you're in trouble.
You know, can we talk about something that you probably have as much expertise in answering as practically anybody? The dispute between Sanders and Warren and that conversation in 2018, did he or did he not say to her, a woman can't win in 2020? You lived through stuff that I think most people would agree that a man in your position as acting governor would never have lived through, never have been treated like you were. Let's fast forward a couple of decades. Can a woman win in 2020?
A woman can win. Will she be treated exactly the same? No. Sometimes she'll get a break and some advantages, and she has to be able to take advantage of those. Sometimes she'll be treated differently to her detriment, and she's got to be facile enough to take advantage of those.
Here's a little bit between Sanders and Warren last night, even though she never directly addressed the issue. He did. Here it is.
Anybody knows me knows that it's incomprehensible that I would think that a woman could not be president of the United States.
Can a woman beat Donald Trump? Look at the men on this stage. Collectively, they have lost 10 elections. The only people on this stage who have won every single election that they've been in are the women.
Pretty good line, I should say.
I think it was the best line from the night. And the governor would appreciate this. I was thinking about what I felt like watching the show was roller derby. And in a roller derby, and if you remember circa 1976, Charlie's Angels, that classic episode of Charlie, even the friends will eventually nudge each other and elbow their way to win. And I think you're seeing that play there. They're friends. But this is coming down to only one person walks out of Des Moines.
Friends?
Out of Iowa.
She would not shake. I showed this a few minutes ago. She would not shake his hand.
Can I say two things? He didn't shake her hand in the beginning when she first went out. But more importantly, very few people, and I've said this before, she got Bernie to talk about the race that he beat the Republican.
30 years ago.
30 years ago? You know how he won that race, right?
No, I do not.
The NRA endorsed him.
No, he was
the
really bad on
NRA
guns early on.
endorsed him because the Republican congressman had turned on them. I'm
you
not
should
sure
have
he
been at
wants
the
to
debate
talk
last
about
night.
that.
I'll tell you. So does it gall you that Tom Steyer bought his way onto the stage last night and Kamala Harris and Cory Booker are sitting home?
It does. It bothers me tremendously. I know the threshold in terms of the polling and the unique donors creates a barrier for Deval Patrick. Deval should have been on that stage. I talked to Cory, actually sent Cory a message yesterday because we hosted him when he came to Boston. We needed that voice. The absence in the trending on social media was a debate so white, dim debate so white. It was true. You need that diverse perspective in debate, and we lack that.
How much
Here's the thing, though. After that debate performance, I don't think we have to worry about Tom Steyer again.
Well, except he's rising with his $100+ million in ads
money,
in Nevada
money matters.
and South Carolina. Does this, speaking of Deval Patrick, does this help him in more than marginal ways? Another former governor of Massachusetts, that he's the only African-American left standing in this race.
I think, and I've had this conversation with many who, even in other camps, if you allow Deval Patrick to get an opportunity to get the microphone, this race will change dramatically. Unlike Kamala and Corey, who I think are amazing speakers, he is the best speaker, and if he was on that stage, he would have dominated.
Are you nodding in agreement there?
Yeah, I think there's an interesting opening because the one or two people on that stage that I think can win haven't gotten traction, and somebody who can win, if the Democrats keep saying they need to nominate somebody who could win, you assume at some point they will.
Would you have added Deval Patrick to your Klobuchar list if he had been on the stage last night?
Yes.
You would have. Well, speaking of that, Castro, before he left, talked about one of the reasons he wasn't on the debate stage was the unfairness of the process. You have to do well at either national polls or local polls. My original reaction was that's ridiculous until I said the two first states, Iowa and New Hampshire, are two of the whitest states in America, totally unrepresentative. No really big. Des Moines is 1/3 the size. Is there not an argument to be made that starting the presidential campaigns with Iowa and New Hampshire is totally unfair to the rest of America?
Well, I think we have to look at the structure of our elections in general. The world is changing so quickly, both from a diversity and a technology standpoint, that it has upended how elections work and how we reach voters. And so I think there's been all kinds of unintended consequences that have to be revisited.
How come African-American leaders, you included, who are so critical to the Democratic Party, are not saying no more of this, no more Iowa and New Hampshire leading the pack?
So those have been calls coming from many years before me. They've happened, but the parties are very entrenched on how they do things. The Democratic Party, we can't change the electoral college that easily, but we can change this caucus and Super Tuesday process. And I don't know if the parties are willing to do that. And we don't have the sway in the parties like we would like to.
Before we go to, we got a lot of email in here last time. What is that LearnLaunch thing you introduced the former governor as? If Patrick or Klobuchar was the Democratic nominee, would you vote for him?
Yes.
Wow. What is LearnLaunch? Stick around for this for a second. I was asked since you left, and I had no idea. I read your website. What do you do?
So LearnLaunch is a nonprofit that brings together the education innovation sector, all the brightest minds in technology, higher education that we have in abundance in this region, and tries to bring them together in creative ways to improve the education ecosystem, whether that's early childhood, K through 12, higher education, workforce development. We still have a lot of gaps in that system. We aren't closing the achievement gap. We have workforce development issues. A lot of times public-private partnerships work best.
So that the education that those kids get, should they choose to go into the tech sector, this is a question, matches what the needs of the industry?
So that's one part of it, but it doesn't matter what sector you're going to work in. We believe that innovations can help to better improve teaching. So teachers like my daughter, who's going to be a middle school math teacher, she needs to understand what the best interventions are. Sometimes they're technology, sometimes they're not. But how do you best reach every student? There's so much information, so much research, so many different tools out there. There needs to be intermediaries, ecosystems, folks like us helping to bridge that. And we do a great conference in January at the Heinz.
Huge, I hear. What's the website for this operation?
LearnLaunch.org. And my goal is to have us take a bigger leadership role. Get that alliteration?
Got it. 15 seconds. What do you think?
I'm a fan, and I'm looking forward to supporting the governor any way I can.
Terrific. Michael Curry, it's great to see you.
Great to see you
Governor
as well.
Swift, wonderful to see you as well. Thanks so much.